Hey, good morning, everybody. It's 9 o'clock, time to start. Today is day 3. We're doing chapters 5, 6, and 7 today. Yes, we got a lot to cover. But before we do that, some announcements, and then we're going to go over the homework from last night, and we'll get busy. So if you don't mind, I'm going to moderate everyone. Good morning, Luciana. I'm going to moderate everyone, and I'm going to go over the homework from last night first. Again, you don't have to turn this stuff in, and it's great study guides for you if you need it. So if you would, here comes the homework answers for chapters 3 and 4 you did last night. For chapter 3, the answers to the questions are: number 1, B for boy; 2, C; 3A; 4, B for boy; 5A; 6D as in dog; 7C; 8D as in dog; 9C; and 10D as in dog. Once again, chapter 3 was number 1, B boy; 2, C; 3A; 4, B boy; 5A; 6D dog; 7C; 8D dog; 9C; and 10D as in dog. Chapter 4 homework answers are as follows. Number 1, D for dog; 2A; 3C; 4, B for boy; 5A; 6B for boy; 7C; 8D as in dog; 9A; and 10A. Again, chapter 4 answers are: number 1, D dog; 2A; 3C; 4, B boy; 5A; 6B boy; 7C; 8D dog; 9A; and 10A. Were there any questions on the homework before we move on today? Not seeing any, then let me moderate the conversation, make some announcements, and then we'll get busy from chapters 5, 6, and 7 today. As always, there is no recording of the pre-licensing class. The Real Estate Commission is very specific about this. They do not allow it. So please, no recording, audio or video. Secondly, we had a little trouble, but I think now everybody understands there's no posting of any links on the chat section, guys, unless I do it, or unless you get it cleared through me to post something on that. We've had trouble in the past, so if someone's posting a link, I'm going to have to immediately ask them to remove it or may be expelled from class because we can't take the risk of getting our system infected. No foul language in our discussions. Shouldn't have to say that, but just a reminder. If you're having connection issues, number 1, and do it now, close out all other apps and programs on your machine. It takes bandwidth away from our program. And as you know, audio and video soak up a lot of bandwidth. You can't have other apps running. If you got social media, that's really bad. You got to close that stuff out. It just soaks the bandwidth and you're going to have a bad connection as a result. If you continually experience bad connections, just do yourself a favor. Hit that little semicircle with an arrow on it next to the address bar, and we'll reset your connection. You'll have to log back in. But if you only miss a minute or two, it's no big deal. So be aware of the connection issues. If you have administrative questions like where do I find resources? How do I do this? What about my hours? What about the test? What about this? Where's the schedule? You can always go to recareercenter.com and find it, or wait till noon when Noel or Lauren, one of our admins, gets on and gives you a face-to-face Q&A about all those things. They're very specific. They're very good at what they do. And please do me and them a favor. Stay online and ask your questions. Don't wander away, get something done, then come back and expect them to answer your question and they have already answered it 3 or 4 times. So it's just not fair to the entire class or them to keep repeating questions over and over again. You've got to stick around for the Q&A, and then they'll be done much quicker and everybody will be happy. If you have any other questions or concerns about issues, you can always ask me at the end of the day. I stick around when class is over to see if you've got any questions I can answer. If not, I always give out my email address. You can send me an email. If I can help you, I will. If I can't, I'll tell you that also. Once again, we take breaks from 10:30 to 11 for a half hour. We take a lunch break 12 to noon. And then we take another half hour, 2:30 to 3 o'clock coffee break in the afternoon. And we'll finish up by 4:30. And as always, I tell everyone, please make sure you pre-read your chapters before coming to school. It makes for a much better discussion, much better comprehension and retention of information for you. And we spend less time trying to clear up concepts that you already now have a better understanding of. So if today is your first day, welcome. I look forward to helping you get your real estate license. If you have questions about schedules and stuff, again, wait till noon, or you can just go to recareercenter.com and get your information. Other than that, if there are any other questions, let me have them now so we can take care of them before we start. And I'm not seeing any other questions. So I will moderate the conversation. And we'll start our presentation with Chapter 5. What is real estate? That's a good question. You're going to want to sell it, so you better know what it is. So at the end of this chapter, you should be able to identify the characteristics of real estate, as well as distinguish between the characteristics of personal property and what fixtures are. All right. So real estate could be described as a bundle of legal rights. You have the right to possess the property. You own it. It's yours. No questions about it. You have the right to do that. You have the right to use the property for any legal purpose. You do not have the right to use property for an illegal purpose. You have the right of quiet enjoyment, meaning no one should be questioning as to your ownership of property. If they do, you have the right to defend your ownership rights by producing documents or whatever is necessary. You have the right to quiet enjoyment. You have the right to privacy as well. You can exclude other people from your property. No trespassing. That's public notice to say no one's allowed to get on my property unless you have permission. Or if you just want to paint purple paint marks across your borders of your property, that's the international sign of no trespassing. You can do that too. And people will not be allowed to trespass on your property. You have the right to dispossess or alienate your property. In other words, you have the right to lease your property out to make money or profit or gain an income from doing it. You have the right to sell your property if you want to. You have the right to give it away. You have the right to give it or will it to your heirs, dedicate it to a public entity if you wish. You have the right to do it what you wish with the property, almost. Because there's some laws and rules about what you can't do. And we're going to get into that later this week. But these are the rights you get when you buy real estate. You also get things like the land. Oh yeah, I get some land with real estate, right? Well, the land refers to the Earth's surface. In New Jersey, however, it's more than just the Earth's surface. In some Western states, the term referring to the Earth's surface is finite. That's what you own, the top several, just a few feet of the land, the surface of the land. You out west, you don't own the water, gas, minerals, oil, gold, silver, uranium, whatever's in the ground. You don't own that. In New Jersey, however, you do. You own the land, the surface, and everything under it, going all the way down to the center of the earth. Good luck digging that deep. I thought I could when I was a kid, but nah, it didn't happen. But you have the right to the things that are on the surface of the land as well as the things that are under the surface of your land. Those are yours. You own them. So your rights extend down to the center of the earth, and you have the opposite. Air rights above the surface of the land. Your air rights extend to infinity. Well, I'm going to call me up NASA and tell them no more space shuttles flying over my house or no more space stations. I hate that thing. Well, guess what? Good luck trying. However, if you have a neighbor whose tree limb hangs over your yard and over your house, and in the next big storm, you know that limb's going to crack and smack your house, you have the right to protect about the intrusion on your air rights by asking your neighbor to trim his tree. If he doesn't, you have the right to trim his tree. You have the right to protect your air rights. Now, these are kind of limited air rights, but you still have air rights. You also have water rights. Any water on your property is yours. Any subsurface rights, anything under the ground belongs to you. So literally you have all these rights plus the land and everything on it and everything underneath it. The rocks, the trees, the shrubs, all that stuff belongs to you who is the landowner. You also own all the man-made improvements on the land. The house, the driveway, the patio, the pool, the deck, whatever man puts on property as a permanent attachment is part of the real estate. So land, besides the rights and the improvements, are all encumbersome of real estate ownership. Before I move on, does anybody have any questions about what real estate actually is? Good, there is a question, I'll wait. Andrew, did you have a question? And Sierra has a question. Would sidewalks count as part of the man-made land rights? Well, it depends on your municipality, Andrew. Most sidewalks are owned by the municipality. But again, you may be responsible for the upkeep and maintenance of that sidewalk. So each town is unique. Each town has their own rules. So you should contact your borough hall to ask them who's responsible for the sidewalks. When do permits come in if you can basically do anything? I'm sorry, Sierra. When do permits come in if you can basically do anything you owned land? Oh, to your own land, I'm sorry. Well, Sierra, we're going to talk about that in another chapter, but the fact is there's certain rules and limitations about private ownership. One of those is the public right to govern what you can and can't do with your property in a specific zone, and the fact that there are building codes and zoning ordinances you must adhere to. We're going to talk about that in another chapter, but it's a good question, and we will address it, but in another chapter. Even though you may own the land under you, aren't there certain laws about digging because of pipes and things like that? Of course, Dale. You don't want to just dig into the ground and hit a gas line. That's why you have to dial 811 before you dig, to make sure that where you're going to dig, there's no utility lines. And it's a free service. You can always do that. Why do you need a permit to build a pole, for example? Well, again, hang on, guys. We're getting off track. We're not concerned about permits, building codes, zoning ordinances. Those are effects or limitations of ownership. I'm just talking about what you own. So when we get to limitations of ownership, which will be later this week, I promise, then you can explore those things with me at that time. But right now, I just want to describe what real estate is. So let's keep our questions pertinent to this information. So was there any other questions before I moved on? And again, I'm not trying to, dispel your question. I just want to address it at the right time. That's all. Okay, so no other questions. Let's move on. All right, so real estate, the land, the rights, the improvements, the shrubs, the bushes, the trees, the permanent house, everything. But wait a minute, before I talk about water rights, what about my car? Isn't that part of the real estate? No, that's personal property. Huh? Yeah, personal property is different than real property. I'm going to talk about how to determine whether an article is part of the real estate or whether it's personal property in a few minutes. So we're going to discuss that. Excuse me, but let's get back to now water rights and air rights. Air rights, first of all, let's clear up. You do have the right to protect any encroachment into your airspace from any neighbor. Anybody's tree limb hanging over, you have the right to chop it off or tell them to move it. However, there are limitations. You do have the right to sell or lease your air rights if you wish to. Wow, what's that? There are certain areas where private homeowners have been approached by cell tower companies, those cell phone towers. And they say, can we put a tower on your property? We'll pay you for the air rights that we use. One guy I know gets a check for $20,000 a month from a cell phone company tower operator because he leases out his air rights to them. If you've ever been to Grand Central Station in Manhattan, there's a building above Grand Central Station called the MetLife Building. How did they get to put that building over the top of Grand Central Station? Well, the Port Authority sold the air rights to whoever there was at the time they developed. It was Pan Am back in the 40s and 50s. They built a building over top of Grand Central Station because they purchased their air rights from them and then could build above them. So long as the normal operation of trains and things underneath are constant, there should be no problem. So you have the right to sell or lease your air rights, the mineral rights as well. What do you mean? I mean, what if I'm out digging my tomato patch next April, turn the land over, June comes along, April, May, and May 1st or May, as soon as Mother Days come, time to plant the crops. Well, while I'm turning over the soil in April, I find this interesting little rock, and I take it to a person who does rock studies, and they say, oh, you have gold in your soil. That belongs to me. But I don't think I'm going to find any gold in the soil here in New Jersey. Just saying. But it belongs to me. Anything in the ground belongs to me. If I want to, I could lease those rights to the minerals in my ground to someone who would want to mine them. Or if I discover oil in my ground, not your neighbor's oil tank you tapped into, a deposit of oil in my ground. And an oil drilling company says, we'll pay you rights to get your oil out of the ground. Well, I can make a lot of money by leasing out my oil, gas, mineral rights to somebody who wants to mine them. So I have control over my real estate, but I can give control to others if I want by leasing them out or selling them. Now, water rights is a different thing. Let's talk about water rights. But before I go on, was there any additional questions to what real estate is or isn't? Thought I saw, okay, I had a question, but you answered it when you started talking about oil. Okay, good. So no other questions. Let's move on then. Now, water rights. If you own land that abuts a body of water, in other words, it borders on the water. It could be a stream, it could be a lake, it could be the intercoastal waterway, the bayside, or it could be the ocean itself, beachfront. Or you live next to a little stream or a big river. You have certain rights about ownership. Now, typically on a smaller river or rivulet or stream, your border of your property goes to the middle of that stream on a small stream. If it's a large stream, no, you end at the border of the stream. And how big is small and how big is big? I can't give you that answer. It's subjective to your inspectors and the administrative staff who operate that stuff. But the fact is, if you have a little babbling brook next to your property, you own right into the middle of that babbling brook. If you live next to the Hudson River, then no, you don't own to the middle of the Hudson River. There is a big difference here. In fact, the general catchphrase for water rights is called riparian rights. Riparian. What does that mean? Riparian refers to the fact that you own property and the border under which the water runs. And that water on that side of your border is yours. You can use it. Can't use all of it because remember, the other half is the neighbor's. You can't touch his. So you can't like block the entire stream and dam it up and divert it into your pool. You can't do that. And besides, people downstream have rights to that water too. Out west, there's big interstate battles going on about who controls things like the water from the Snake River, the Columbia River, the Colorado River, and all that stuff. Who gets that water? Well, what about the downhill people? Don't they get downstream people? Don't they have rights to that water? Yeah, they do. But I need it for my golf course. Well, yeah, there's a big battle going on about those water rights out west. Limited supply of something and big demand, you're going to have problems. But here in New Jersey, we really don't have that problem. We've been blessed, by the way, again, with a very wet season, and we have abundance of water. Our reservoirs are full. We're not hurting for water. So the general catchphrase, once again, is riparian rights. However, there's a subtitle called littoral rights. And littoral rights are reserved for those properties that are next to or abut a navigable waterway or a tidally influenced body of water. The Hackensack River is a tidally influenced body of water up to a certain point, just like the Passaic River is. Except down in, where is it, Patterson, Passaic, you have the dam there. Above the dam, it's riparian rights on the Passaic River. Below that, it may be littoral because the ebb and flow of the tide that affects the river there. So anything that has a tidal influence on it, the Hudson River, is a littoral body of water. The ocean is a littoral body of water, etc. Those are littoral rights. But again, the overall phrase, catchphrase for water rights is riparian rights. Now, certain terms, before I move on, did anybody not understand riparian or littoral or have a problem determining what's what? Good. Okay, there is. Okay, I'll wait. Can you explain the riparian rights again, please? For those people who live next to a body of water, your border of your property is on that river, stream, lake, whatever. You have riparian rights. However, if your land abuts a tidally influenced body of water, then it's called littoral rights, or that river is navigable. Then it's littoral. So all littoral rights are riparian, but not all riparian are littoral. Okay, Rachel, yeah, that's actually correct. Your statement is a correct statement, yes. I see other questions coming, so I'll wait. Littoral rights, lakes, large bodies, riparian, rivers, streams. Littoral is tidally influenced or navigable waterways. Riparian is non-navigable, non-tidally influenced bodies of water. Tidally, T-I-D-A-L, tides, high tide, low tide. Hope I got you guys straight on that. Okay, no other questions. Okay. Oh, there is. Okay, I'll wait. Can you repeat what you just said? At what point? I mean, besides, everything I'm talking about, guys, is right in your book. I'm not getting any new concepts here. It's right from the book. So what is exactly you want me to repeat, Ayana? You said non-something. What? I'm sorry. So you don't own a body of water with littoral rights. That is correct, Adele. You don't own the body of water with riparian rights if it's on your border. You only own up to the middle of the stream or whatever. I'm sorry. Okay, now you're confusing me. I said that littoral rights are I'm sorry. I missed something here. There's a disconnect somehow. Non-navigable. Yeah, in other words, no. I didn't say littoral rights are non-navigable. I said, littoral rights. One more time, guys. Riparian rights is any property that borders water. Littoral rights are those properties that border water that are navigable. You mean you can steer ships on it and power your boat up and down? Or tidally, high and low tide influenced bodies of water. I don't know how else I can explain that. Can't riparian rights also be navigable? One more time, and I'm going to try, this is the last time, guys. Riparian rights are any property that borders water. Littoral rights are those property that border water that have tidal influence, high and low tides, or are navigable. Ships sail, power up the river. Depending on how big the river is, and if it's navigable, then it's littoral. If it's smaller and non-navigable, then it's riparian. I don't know. Yeah, I'm assuming that people are looking at their books and reading this stuff and see the diagrams that explain what I'm talking about. I'm assuming so. But you know what happens when I assume. So anyway, I do need to move on, guys. I understand your curiosity, but I think you're making a mountain out of a molehill. You just have to understand those definitions. In private property, to get to the beach, the owner has access to let you get to use the, I'm sorry, Julio. Let me try to understand what you're asking me. In private property, to get to the beach, the owner needs to I guess, have access to let you know. I'm sorry, Julio. I'm trying. If I'm understanding your question, you're saying, let's say you own a beachfront house on LBI. Let's say you own a beachfront house on LBI. You have no obligation to give anybody rights to do anything on your property. If they want to get to the ocean, they can use a public access roadway, not your private property. No, you don't have the requirement to give your use of your land to someone else. You don't. So I don't know where you're coming from on that, but understand a property owner who lives beachfront. And I'm going to have to moderate here and stop the conversation because apparently we need to do a lot of backtracking here for a minute. Let me go one more time through this so everybody's crystal clear. Riparian rights are any property that border water. Littoral rights are properties that border water that are navigable, ships can move and navigate, or tidally influenced, high and low tide. I never said anything about you have to give your rights up to other people to access the water via your property. I never said anything like that, and you don't. So I don't know where you guys are coming up with some of these ideas, but try to stick to the concept of what we're talking about and not try to permutate these ideas out into different variances, because that never works. The what ifs never help you answer questions. Stick to the definitions and you'll pass the exam. That's all I'm saying. Now, just to be clear, let's say you have a house on beachfront. Your property starts at the street behind, right? If you're looking at the beach, the property starts behind you on the roadway and goes to the beach. But where in the beach? First of all, you don't own up to the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. You only own up to the average high tide mark, that the tide influences the water. You have high tide and you have low tide. At high tide, if that water laps up to your property border, then no one has the right to walk across your property. However, at low tide, when the beach is exposed, that's public right-of-way access, and everybody has the right to do that, and you don't own that property. So again, riparian, little rivers, streams, lakes. Littoral, large streams, tidally influenced bodies of water. Oceans, Great Lakes, things like that have tidal influence. I don't know how else to basically put that into a nutshell, guys, but I don't want to spend more time on this than we absolutely have to, and we've already exceeded that limit. So I do need to move on. Terms you have to understand: littoral and riparian, as we talked about. And what happens when water makes your border expand by gaining land? You mean if an action of water in a stream deposits silt, sand, and material on my border, then I gain more land? Yes. That's called accretion. Accretion is when the action of the water deposits more material on your border, building it up. And because of that, the stream tends to move further away from your house. You gained land through accretion. The opposite of that is erosion. The water action takes property away from your border and you lose property. That's called erosion. Your property actually shrunk. The material being moved, the sand, the grit, the gravel, the dirt, the rocks, is called alluvion. Alluvion, that's material, the silt. So you can accrete material, alluvion, it builds up, or that alluvion can be eroded away, taken away from your border property. You either gain land through accretion or you lose land through erosion. The term reliction is a very specific meaning. And if you read the book, you probably understood what it meant, but if not, let me clarify. You live on a body of water. Let's say it's a lake. And you live in a lake association. We have quite a few of them here in New Jersey. Because of that, you probably have a dam that caused the lake to be created. But today, the costs and maintenance and requirements to operate a dam are exceedingly great. Many lake communities are determining that the costs are not worth it and are abandoning and taking down dams, which means as the water gradually pulls away from the border of property, more land is exposed. That's called reliction. It's not depositing or taking material away. It's just that the water is receding from the property borderline and moving further away. That's called reliction. Whose property is it? Depends on the lake association. If it's common property, then you probably put a park back there. If not, it may be the private property owner's right. You have to obviously check with that homeowners association to determine that. And one last term, well, actually two last terms, avulsion. Avulsion infers a sudden change to the border of the property, whether positive or negative. What do you mean? Well, let's say there's a huge storm, huge, dumps 10 inches of rain in 14 hours in your location. But what's going to happen is your river is going to swell. And the action of that water is going to be compounding the impact on your property. And all of a sudden you lost 20 feet of land in a matter of hours. That's avulsion, a sudden change. Or the opposite occurred. It suddenly deposited 20 extra feet of border on your property. That's an avulsive action, a sudden, quick, violent change in the border of your property due to water action. That's called avulsion. And the last term is called front foot. Now, when properties are not abutting waterways, the front foot of a property is determined side yard to side yard across the street. That's the frontage of the property. If it's 120 feet across, then you have 120 front feet of property against the road. So one linear foot is one front foot against the road. However, if your property borders a waterway, the water is the front foot from side yard to side yard distance. So I think I did a pretty good job of explaining these things. Does anybody have any last wrap-up questions to these definitions? Because we do need to move on. Apparently there are, so we'll wait. What's the difference between erosion and Kevin, do you have a book? Kevin, do you have a book? It's on its way. Erosion is, I'm sorry that you don't know what erosion is, but that's a wearing away of your property border. Alluvion is the material being worn away or added to the property. Guys, again, you're asking me to explain concepts that are clearly printed in your book. Guys, you gotta read this textbook. You can't rely on my conversation to pass your exam. If you don't read your textbook, I'm going to guarantee you one thing. If you don't read your textbook, you're not going to pass the exam. So please read the books, please. I'm going to move on. I'm sorry, but I do need to move on. I think we're wasting way too much time on questions you can easily look up in your book. And I do need to move on, guys. We got 3 chapters to cover. So sorry. Now, before I made mention that not all property is real property, obviously you have personal property. Personal property is also known as chattel, C-H-A-T-T-L-E, chattel, or is it E-L? I'm sorry. But either way, Chattel, or TTEL, chattel. So personal property is chattel. That's a legal term for it. Real property is real property. There is no other word for that. And there is no other types of property. There's either real property or personal property. If it's not personal, it's real. If it's not real, it's personal. That's simple. You have one or the other. There is no in between. There's no hybrid. There's no nothing else. A farm operation. The farm tractor, the combines, the tillers, all that stuff, fertilizers, all those machinery items, those are personal property of the farmer. However, all the land, the trees, the crops, we're going to talk about that in a minute. Well, everything else is real property. The house is real property. Farmer's car, personal property. You get personal property with a bill of sale, and sometimes it's like in a car or a vehicle, a title of ownership. With real estate, you get a deed. You don't get a title. You have title rights, but you don't get a title. You get a deed in real estate. So already you know by method of ownership whether it's real or personal property. Did you get a bill of sale? Personal property. Did you get a deed? Real property. Now, all property that is not real is personal, and all personal property, and all that's not personal is real property. Now, that farm, let's go back to that farm. What about the crops in the field? Are those real property items or personal property items? And by definition, they are personal property items. How so? Any annual planting is a personal property item. The pansies that you put in May are going to die in October. They will not come back just because they're plants. They're annuals. They don't come back. Any annual planting is personal property. Excuse me. Any perennial planting, a tree, a shrub that comes back year after year with no care, is real property. Therefore, the crops in the field, which are annual plantings, are personal property of the farmer. They are called emblements. These are all terms taken directly from your book. And if you pre-read this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you didn't, you scratch your head saying, oh, can you repeat that and explain all these things over again? And that's a waste of time, guys. So again, always a good idea to pre-read your texts before you come. And if you don't have a book, get one. All right. Now, before I move on, was there any questions for clarity about what's real property versus what's personal property? Julio, you have a question, and so does Denise. Or not. So the trees that are on the property are part of the real estate, but the crops would be emblements. Correct, Denise. And Julio Baez Sosa, you have a question. You've been typing a big question apparently for a while here. What's your question, Julio? I prefer one sentence questions, guys, not paragraphs. And Karen, okay, I'll wait. I'm sorry, but Julio, are you typing a question or just leave your dialog bar open? What if it is an apple tree? Is it still real property or does it become personal? The tree is part of the real estate. The annual fruit is personal property. Well, then, Julio, then don't leave your dialogue bar open. It looks like you're asking a question, that's all. Even if you rest your mouse on that dialogue bar, it looks like you're asking a question. That's why we wait for the questions. The tree is perm, the fruit is not. Correct. I see there's a few more questions, but I'll wait. Would large stones used for landscaping be considered personal or real? That's a real good question. I'm going to moderate here and stop and answer this one. Let's talk about that. Good question. Is it Sangeeta? Okay. So let's say I'm doing some landscaping work and I have a landscaper drop off a bunch, like 7 or 8 big boulders. And he puts them on my property and he's got to put them in and install them in the yard. As they sit in the big pile delivered, those are still personal property items. However, when those are placed and landscaped into place, they become part of the real property. So in other words, personal property can be converted to real property. And the opposite is true too. I had a couple trees taken down a few weeks ago. And by doing so, those trees, a maple and a oak tree, though they were part of the real estate. However, as soon as I cut them down, I severed them from the land. And then I had my son and I chop up all that wood to make firewood, and we stored it in a bin. I converted real property to personal property by the act of severance, removing it from the property. So property can change character. Real property can become personal property, and personal property, those big rocks that the landscaper delivered, those are personal property until he installs them in place and landscapes around them. Then they're real property. So I think I answered your question. It was a good one. Was there any other questions before we move on? Boy, hang on a second. If someone has the rights to the apples that is not the owner of the real property, does the real property owner have to allow the person to harvest the fruit crop? Yes. Would the apples be specified trade property? What do you mean? Apples are personal property. It's a fruit. It's an annual production. It's not trade anything. It's personal property. Fences are considered permanent, correct? Yes. Pools, yes, except above ground pools. What about a built-in outdoor grill? If it's built in, and we're going to talk about fixtures in a few minutes. We're not talking about that yet, but we will get to that in just a few minutes, I promise. What about in-ground pools? They're permanent. They stay with the property. They're part of the real estate. Okay, I think I answered the question, so let's move on. Now, since we did bring up some of those things, and since the next PowerPoint addresses these things, let's talk about fixtures. Fixtures. Fixtures are items in real estate that could be construed as real property or personal property. Let me start out with giving an example. Hey, we'd like to sell our house. Let me come over, take a look at your house. We'll talk about price and list your property. So I go over to someone's house. And while I'm there, one of the things I ask the owner is, gee, you know, I saw that hallway entry foyer chandelier, and it's beautiful. It's got a good $10,000, $20,000 chandelier. Yes, Aunt May gave that to us when we got married, and we're very proud of it. It's beautiful. My question, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, is, are you going to be including that with the sale of the property? Or are you going to be excluding that from the property? Well, we're going to take it with us. Okay, so we have to put in the listing so that all buyers, when they come to see it, know that that chandelier is not part of the real property. Well, it's personal anyway. Of course they'd know that. No, they wouldn't. And this is the reason why. That chandelier is bolted into the ceiling structure, isn't it? Yes. It's also hardwired into the electrical system, isn't it? Yes. Therefore, that light, that chandelier, is part of the real estate because of the method of attachment. But it's our personal, yeah, I know it's your personal property, but by definition, because it's attached permanently to the structure with bolts and hard wires, it's considered real estate. That's why it's imperative that we tell buyers that item is not included in the sale as part of the real estate. You're going to remove it as personal property when you move. So we have to notify buyers that when they come to see the property, that the chandelier is not included, or else they would assume it would be because of its method of attachment. Well, what about the refrigerator in the kitchen? Is that personal or real property? Well, let's see. The majority of refrigerators that I'm aware of are on wheels, and they plug into electrical outlets. By definition, since they're not permanently attached to the kitchen, those are personal property items. So you have the right to take your refrigerator when you move. It's your, unless it's a built-in style like a Sub-Zero. Yeah, you know, those luxury ones that are, the fascia is all cabinetry matched and it's permanently installed. It's not on wheels. It's hardwired and hard plumbed, and you can't just wheel it out. That's then a part of the real estate because of its method of attachment. The book says method of annexation. That's meaning the method of attachment. Huh. So if an item, a personal property item, is permanently attached to the building, then it's part of the real property. By definition, yes. And we've run into trouble in the recent years. This has been pretty much solved by now. But what happened was buyers were suing sellers at the closing because the seller had maybe 4 or 5 wall-mounted flat-screen panel TVs in the house that they took with them. And the buyers argued because those panel TVs were attached to the wall mount that was permanently attached to the wall by bolts, that it's part of the real property and must stay. And by law, they were correct. And those sellers had to fork over some money. Now we know that flat screen wall mounted TVs must be excluded as not part of the real estate when the property is sold. So we have to say all wall-mounted flat-screen panel TVs are not included in the sale of the property. Well, what about the hot tub on the back deck? Isn't that part of the real estate too? Well, let's ask. Is it hardwired, hard plumbed? Did you build a deck around it to adapt it specifically for a use on your property? And if so, that's another definition of what real estate is. Then it must stay with the property. But I want to take it with me. Then you have to state back deck hot tub is not included with the sale. So as you see on the PowerPoint, the last bullet item says legal tests of a fixture. Now there's 4 legal tests. I've already mentioned 2, method of annexation, method of attachment, or adaptation of the article to the real estate. Well, it's permanently attached and it's built in. It was adapted for specific use by 2 definitions. That's real estate. What about the washer and dryer? Well, if it's on wheels and movable and plug-ins, then it's personal property. But if they're built in and hardwired and plumbed, not on wheels, then they're part of the real estate by method of annexation, adaptation. They meet the definitions, are part of the real estate. But if you say washer and dryer are not included in the sale, then you stated that they are not to be included in the sale and you're taking them with you when you leave. So it's very, very, and I'm going to say very important that when listing property, the agent must ask what's included and what's not included. Because if you don't do that, then buyers have a reasonable expectation of that item being conveyed with the real estate. And if it's not, then there's going to be a problem at closing and a settlement may have to take place. So personal property that's permanently attached to a land or a building is called a fixture. And as a fixture, it's part of the real estate. But wait a minute, whoa, there's got to be other rules here, and there's 2 more legal tests to determine something's a fixture or personal property. Let's use a landlord and tenant relationship, a tenant fixture. So you rent out an apartment to a tenant who comes in and hangs some lamps, puts some shelves up, repaints the walls, hangs some custom decor on the windows. Wait a minute. Most leases, as we'll talk about on Monday, leases state that tenants don't have the right of improvement by attaching shelves to the wall. They're not just putting them up with thumbtacks, they're hammering in nails or bolting them into the wall, making them permanent attachments. Or they changed the color of the paint. They repainted the property. They improved it, but they don't have a right to do that. They also put up custom window treatments specifically designed just for those windows in that apartment. Because of these things and the landlord's requirement that no improvements occur, if a tenant were to do that, the landlord has a right to do one of the following things. One, when the tenant moves out, he can ask that all those items stay as parts of the real estate, and he has a legal right to demand that. Which means that tenant spent all this money and he's going to lose it. He's not going to get those items back. Or the landlord could say, you did all these improvements without my permission. In order for me to re-rent the apartment, I have to return the apartment to its original condition. So you're going to have to take all that stuff out, repaint, repatch, reseal, sand, spackle, do whatever it needs to be done before you move out. If you don't, I'm going to do it and take it out of security deposit. So tenant fixtures have to be described between the landlord and tenant so that whatever relationship they have reaches an understanding about whose property those improvements are or are not. So the relationship of the parties is another test of whether an item is a fixture or not. But the most important test, which trumps all other three, is the number one intention of the parties. You must state your intentions as to whether you're leaving certain items with the property or not. And if you're leaving them, then they're part of the real estate. But if you say that these are not included, then your intentions are made clear that these are not part of the real estate. So when looking at real property and asking questions of the owner, are you going to take that, you're going to leave it, will help you understand what's being included and what's not being included. Those specific dining room chandelier that I started this off with, that entry foil chandelier. Many sellers get the idea, what's mine, I'm taking it with me. But if they don't exclude it from the sale, then the buyer has every reasonable expectation that that chandelier will be there when they move in. Ooh, you can see where this can be a real big problem sometimes. So understand, guys, these are very important items to discuss before selling properties. And your brokers will train you on how to do this in a sequential manner so you cover all items. Now, I still have yet to talk about trade fixtures, but before I do, does anybody else have any questions about real versus personal or anything like that? Let's see, what about the fridge with an ice maker? It has a water line hooked up. That is part of the real estate, correct? Well, is it on wheels? Is it a plug-in machine? And if so, what you got to do is unscrew that water line and seal it, and it's a personal matter. It's a personal property item. You have to put in the listing that they're gonna take the fridge if they decide to. Unless it's a movable fridge, then yes, you must. Can the intention be just stated, or does it need to be in writing on the deed as well? Rachel, good question. I'm going to stop right here and freeze it. Good question, Rachel. Boy, you should be an attorney. You got a good question here. And the answer to your question is this. Can the intention be just stated, or does it need to be in writing on the deed as well? On Friday afternoon, we're going to talk about contracts. And in contracts, there's a law called the, excuse me for a second while I reorganize my pathways of thought. The parole evidence rule. What? Which states the written word contract takes precedence over the oral or spoken word. So if you say, I'm going to leave the fridge, but take it, and in the contract it makes no mention of the fridge, buyers have no recourse to get a fridge from the seller because the written contract supersedes whatever was spoken. So if it says that the chandelier is not included, then it's not included. But if it makes no mention of the chandelier, then it's included. So it must be in writing to be enforceable. If it's not, it means nothing. So good question, Rachel. And that's why it's so important for us as realtors to ask these questions of sellers before we put the house on the market. So anybody who comes to see that property knows in advance that these items are not included, and it's in writing and it's enforceable. But if it was just a verbal, has no water, has no standing in the legal community. Good question. Was there anybody else with a question before I moved on? What if there's nothing in writing, but you have a witness? Did you hear what I said, Robert? Doesn't matter what you say or how many witnesses you have. The written contract supersedes any verbal agreement. So hopefully that made it clear. What about a dishwasher? If it's on wheels and stores in a closet and you hook it up to your kitchen sink, it's personal property because it's movable. But it's built into the counters and it's hardwired and hard plumbed, which they all are, even though they're on wheels. That's part of the real property. What if the fridge is broken? Oh, please, Dobby, really? That's a what if that doesn't really carry water here. Sorry. A home I bought had a fridge that the light came on, but it did not cool at all. If unrepairable, what was all they have to pay part? Sounds like you have a question for an attorney, David. I can't answer that. That's a legal matter, and I'm not an attorney, so I'm sorry I can't answer your question. Guys, these are things your mentor will teach you. Yes, exactly. Your broker's going to teach you all these things. I'm just telling you to pass the test, guys. That's it. What if there's no contract, but you have a witness? Robert, you're missing it. The written contract supersedes any verbal agreement. If you have no contract, you have no agreement by law. And we're going to talk about that on Friday when we talk about contracts. So hold on to your questions about that when we get to Friday. We'll answer all your questions about contracts at that time. What about curtain rides? Thank you, Lucy. But I'm sorry, guys, but I do need to move on. And I don't want to sound like I'm being rude or anything, but guys, you got to read this stuff. You really do. I'm going to move on. I'm sorry. All right. Now, the last topic in this chapter, so we can close this out before our coffee break, is tenant, or should be trade fixtures. Trade fixtures, what are those? So you can tell I must go to a very good coiffeur. Like that. Takes hours to get this style, man. I'm telling you, I've cultured this hair for years. The fact is, I can sit at home in 10 minutes and do a number 4 on my head and I'm done. But if I were to go to a salon, I would walk in the front door, meet the receptionist, tell them I'm here, and stand in line or sit in a chair to wait for my next appointment. Now I'm sitting in a chair, watching a TV, reading a magazine. There's a display case here with product in it. It's all good. It's a salon. Okay, Tim, you're next. So I go and they sit in this chair and they wrap this big thing around me, and they push me back and up and down, and woo, it's a nice chair. And in front of me, there's this mirror and some cabinets and a counter, and the hairstylist has all their tools and everything right there, and I can see my pretty face as they cut my hair. And then they say, okay, you're done. So now they wrap a big towel around my face, nice and hot. That feels good. And they sit me down in a chair, and I lean back, and The towel comes off, and then they wash my head to make sure all that hair and follicles and everything is clean, and then they dry me off. And boy, you know what? It's time for a mani and a pedi. So I sit in one of those big, nice chairs. And yeah, baby, I'm getting the royal treatment. Everything I just described to you, the reception desk, the chairs in the waiting room, the magazines, the TV, the display case, the cutting stations, the mirrors, the counters, the built-ins, the chairs, the wash stations with the chairs and the sinks and everything, and the mani-pedi station with the big chairs and those are all trade fixtures. And because they're trade fixtures, they are personal property of the business owner. They are not part of the real estate. And because they're personal property of the business owner, when the business gets sold, the buyer could opt to buy the business without the personal trade fixtures, or they could buy the business with the trade fixtures in it and have what's known as a turnkey operation. So these trade fixtures, which are personal property of the business owner, are called key items, K-E-Y. And the buyer would pay key money to have those trade fixtures included in the sale of the business if they want to buy them. Therefore, trade fixtures are personal property of the business owner and can add value to the business. But a business owner might just buy the business and say, oh, I'm going to put in my own trade fixtures. Then that person then has to remove all those sinks and chairs and stations and everything, because those are personal property of the business owner. So, does anybody have a question about trade fixtures? Does anybody have a question? I see a statement. I don't see any questions. What happens is the seller leaves all fixtures anyway. Well, if the buyer doesn't want them, if they're trade fixtures, you can throw them out in the dumpster. Was there any other questions? I'm sorry, why? Is there a question? You said if something is attached to the building. Another statement, I don't see a question. If someone sold their retail store and included the merchandise, if someone sold their retail store and included the merchandise and things like shelving, would that be an example of a turn? Yes, it would, Molly. Literally, you're just literally turning a key, opening a door, and starting business up because everything's there. Yes, exactly. So if the business leaves behind the fixtures after it's signed over, is it now the property of the new owner? So if a business leaves behind the fixture, well, the landlord would ensure that that doesn't happen. The landlord has to make sure that when a tenant leaves, he takes all his trade fixtures or leaves it for the new owner. If he's leaving it, the new owner must have requested to have them and paid for them. If not, then the business owner who's moving out must take them with them. He's not allowed to leave there. That's just leaving junk. Regarding the person leasing a property to a tenant, does the owner have the option to either keep the improvements or request the tenant remove them? Yes. Meaning, can the owner force the tenant to leave the improvements? Yes. So does the owner get the final choice and the tenant has to oblige? Yes. Is there any difference between tenant fixtures and trade fixtures? Yes. Tenant fixtures could be construed as real property, where trade fixtures can never be construed as real property. Did you see my question, my comment? This, okay, I'm not sure what that's about. Was there anybody else with a question before we wrap this chapter up with the review questions? Manuel, I'm going to have to ask you to take that link. Thank you. Let's not do that, guys, please. If not declared, the fixtures are left abandoned, and the new owner sells the fixtures, then the prior owner's returns and demands the fixture because it was not. You guys, we can ask what if questions all day long. It doesn't change the concept of what a trade fixture is. How far up do air rights go? What about flying? Oh boy. Okay, hang on. I'm going to moderate here, guys. And I'm going to answer your question. How far up do air rights go? Well, it says to infinity in the textbook. However, are you actually going to call NASA and tell them you can't fly the space station over your house? I dare you. And besides, how do you know it is? What if it's off by 10 feet? Well, that could be in the next door neighbor's yard, and you don't have the right to tell your neighbor what he can and can't do with his air rights. But what about a plane? Don't I have rights about that? Well, yes, you do. In fact, the FAA requires that there must be a minimum ceiling above the land surface that a plane cannot fly under. If you're concerned about too much air traffic, let me tell you this little snippet of a story. Years ago, the residents of Rockaway, New York, if you know where Rockaway is, it's near JFK Airport, complained that jets were taking off and landing over their houses every day, every hour, every minute, and they couldn't get a break. 24/7, 365. Enough of them got together and petitioned the New York Port Authority to limit the air traffic over their house. And you know what the Port Authority did? They did just that. They rotated the approach and departure vectoring routes, how they come in and land, so that neighborhoods get a break every so often. So yes, you do have the rights to enforce your air rights. Will you be successful? If it's a limited basis, probably. But again, you don't have unlimited rights to everything. Let's understand, you don't have unlimited rights to everything. There is actually some borders of what your rights cannot go beyond. So again, I don't want to get into legal discussions about rights or not. I'm just saying that yes, you have the right to enforce your air rights. And I'm going to leave it at that, guys, because I think we've covered everything more than enough to get an understanding of this chapter. So if you will, I'm going to bring up the Q&A for the questions for review of chapter 5, which are located at the end of the chapter. And here we go. So please answer in the section where it's located. Number 1, which of the following is included in the traditional bundle of rights? And let's see, we got 93% of you got it correct. B for boy, use of the property for any legal purpose. That is correct. B for boy. Number 2, which of the following is included in the definition of real estate? Now, I know some people are going to have a problem with this question, and I'm going to explain why. Chattels are personal property. Fixtures, not necessarily real estate if they're stated as personal property. Trees, now, is that real property or is that personal property? Do you know that there are some people that have potted trees? A tree in a pot. Believe it or not, that potted tree is personal property. So when you paint a broad picture with one stroke and include all these things, you have to be very suspect. But minerals in the earth are definitely part of the real property by definition. So D for dog is the best answer. I know this is a bad question regarding is trees real or not. You have to think outside the box sometimes, guys. That's what I'm telling you. Number 3, a specific tract of land is known as a, now I didn't mention it, it's in your textbook. If you read it, you know this answer. If you didn't, you're going to scratch your head. So let's see who read. Specific tract of land is known as awesome, 95% got it. Parcel, B for boy, is called a parcel. Number 4, the owner of a large farm may lease to a gas drilling company his. The owner of a large farm may lease to a gas drilling company his. Again, real good, 88% this time got it. B for boy, subsurface rights. Why would a gas drilling company want to lease riparian, air, or littoral rights? They wouldn't. Only subsurface rights, B for boy. Number 5, manufactured. Permanent additions to land are called And 3 out of 4, you 75% of you got it correct. They're called improvements. Improvements. Number 6, one would have to look at a federal map to identify what? And about 80% of you answered correctly. C, navigable waterways. Correct. Number 7, a person owns land along the Passaic River. As a result, this person may possess certain 95% of it got correct. Riparian rights. A, well done. Good job. Number 8, which of the following items would be considered personal property? Actually started off our conversation regarding personal versus real with this example, and that would be 93% of you are correct. Farm equipment, the tractors, like the tillers and all the combines, all that stuff. Number 9, A tenant in a small house is under a 1-year lease. Without consulting the landlord, the tenant installs awnings over the building front window to keep the sun away from some delicate hanging plants. Which of the following is true? And about 70% of you are correct answering C. The awnings have become part of the real estate and cannot be removed. Number 10, when furnishing a beauty salon, the hairdresser installed 3 shampoo basins, 4 large plate glass mirrors, custom work countertops. Just before the expiration of the lease, the hairdresser has the right to remove. And about 60% of you correctly answered C, A and B. Correct, C. Number 11, the owners are building a new enclosed front porch in their home. The lumber dealer with whom they are contracting just unloaded a truckload of lumber to be used to build the porch in the front of their house. At this point, the lumber is considered and it looks like about 70% of you got it correct. They are chattel. They are personal property items. A. Number 12, when the new front porch is completed, the lumber that the dealer originally delivered will be considered nice. 91% got B for boy correct. Real estate. Yes, it's made part of the real estate by attachment. Number 13, personal property differs from real property in its mobility, of which 81% of you got correct. Good job. 14, a functioning furnace in the basement of a home would be considered and 90% of you got it correct. B for boy, a fixture. It's a fixture, permanently attached, part of the real estate. Number 15, courts apply 4 basic tests to determine whether an item is a fixture or personal property. These include all of the following except And 82% of you answered correctly. D for dog, the opinion of the person purchasing real estate to which the item, your personal opinions mean nothing. Number 16, after a railroad sells air rights for construction of a building over its tracks, trains usually can and about 75% of you, 3 out of 4 of you correctly answered A, operate normally. In fact, I even used that expression when I talked about those things. Number 17, a rancher owns land on which oil is discovered by a drilling company. Based on these facts alone, which of the following statements is true? And about 82% of you correctly answered A. If the owner has not previously conveyed the mineral rights, he owns the oil. Correct. Number 18, a mobile home can be sold as real estate if it's in your book. If you read your book, you know the answer to this question. Excuse me. And about 88% of you agree and are correct, answering C, permanently attached to the land by a foundation. Yes. Once a mobile home is taken off its wheels and put on a foundation, it becomes part of the real property and can be sold as real estate. Number 19, the rights of owners of property along the ocean are known as hmm, 96% of you got C correct, littoral rights. Yes. And finally, last question for review before we take our coffee break. Ownership rights to real estate do not include and about 87% of you got it correct. D, navigable rivers running through the property. Very good. D for dog. All right, real good. We got 1 down, 2 more to go, and it's time for a coffee break. So for the next 30 minutes, everybody can do whatever you want. I'll leave the chat section open. Please, again, no posting of links, no foul language. Chat amongst yourselves, do whatever you want. But 11 o'clock, we're going to rejoin, and we're going to go right into chapter 6.